From a studio high above the clouds of the Okanagan Valley, this is the Cannabis Podcast. Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. Now, here's your host and bud tender, Gary Johnston.
And allow me to welcome you back to the Cannabis Podcast. Thanks so much for coming back. I appreciate it each and every time. Maybe this is your very first visit. Well, if it is, I'm especially happy to welcome you. Over the next 30 or 40 minutes, we're going to talk about cannabis. That's a plant that I'm absolutely passionate about, and I suspect you may have some interest too, and that's probably why you're here. Before we get too much further, let me remind you, this podcast is intended for those of legal consumption age in your jurisdiction, and is intended purely for entertainment and perhaps educational purposes. You should always consume your cannabis responsibly. In episode 174, we're going to take the harvest one step further. I share with you my temple ball creation. That was a lot of fun and pretty pleased with the end results. We get a reminder about CHS, Cannabinoid Hyperemesis Syndrome, and things to watch for with that. More health concerns regarding cannabis and head and neck cancers, a little story on that too. Sales were up in BC last year, and we're going to the islands for Cultivar Corner. It's Salt Spring Magi and Timmy's OG Shark. All of that and more on episode 174 of the Cannabis Podcast. And as always, anytime we start this podcast, very first thing coming out of my mouth is going to be thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate the fact that you are a listener. And I also, of course, appreciate the other support that I get, like from Elvero. Elvero sent me a doobie this last week. Thanks so much, Elvero. I really appreciate it. Commented, loves the podcast, feels relaxed just from listening to it, but wants me to be clearer about dry herb vaping and vape cartridges. Feels that perhaps I don't do enough of a job of separating what those two are, but let me be very clear. There is definitely a difference between a dry herb vaporizer and a vape cartridge, a 510 vape or a PAX vape. Any of those vape cartridges have a lot of other components, whereas a dry herb vaporizer is simply blowing some air across your cannabis. I understand, Elvero. There is definitely a difference, and I will try to make sure that distinction happens on occasion. But again, thanks for the doobie. I truly appreciate it. Also, let me also thank other supporters. If you want to do the same thing like Elvero did, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/cannabispodcast. If you like what you hear and you feel so inclined, feel free to buy me a doobie. Also at Patreon, I want to thank my Patreons, Tony, Rob, Gage, Lloyd, and Roger. I appreciate your support each and every time. And now, let's get to our first story. I got a email from a listener the other day. Tony, hey Tony, thanks for keeping in touch. Unfortunately, it wasn't a great message that Tony sent me. Tony sent me a message inquiring about CHS, Cannabinoid Hyperemesis Syndrome. And Tony was inquiring about this because, unfortunately, his partner has just experienced a severe case of Cannabinoid Hyperemesis Syndrome. So Tony sent me an email wondering if I knew anything about it. Of course, I'm just a toker. I don't have a medical background or any of that kind of stuff. So all I'm going to tell you is the stuff that I have found through the vast array of information on the internet. We did touch on this subject once before, back in, I think, episode 72 or 71, where I did cover this story. It may have, in fact, have been the same story, and if so, I apologize, but I think this is about the best story about this. I'm getting this from the Cleveland Clinic, and I'm using this because of the fact that Tony and his partner just went through this experience, and as they were sitting in the hospital waiting for some diagnosis, Tony was saying there were two other people in that were experiencing the same kind of cough and the frequent, I hate even saying the word vomiting, but here it is. This is from clevelandclinic.org. I also have the link back on the show page, so you can check it out for yourself. I won't give you all the details here. I'm just going to cover the synopsis of what is Cannabinoid Hyperemesis Syndrome. Cannabinoid Hyperemesis Syndrome, or CHS, happens when you have cycles of nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain after using cannabis for a long time. People with CHS often find temporary relief from these symptoms by taking hot baths and showers. Hyperemesis means severe vomiting. Cannabinoids are compounds in the cannabis sativa plant that bind to cannabis receptors in your brain, spinal cord, gastrointestinal tract, and other body tissues. Examples of cannabinoids include tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, and cannabidiol, CBD. CHS is more than just a side effect of marijuana use. It's a condition that can lead to serious health complications if you don't get treatment for it. It's difficult for researchers to know how common CHS is. Not everyone with the condition seeks medical help or tells their provider that they use marijuana. One study found that 32.9% of self-reported frequent marijuana users who came to an emergency department for care met the criteria for CHS. With the widespread use, increased potency, and legalization of marijuana in multiple states in the U.S., CHS may be becoming increasingly common. What are the symptoms? Symptoms of CHS typically come on several years after the start of chronic marijuana use. But not everyone who uses marijuana long-term experiences CHS. Common symptoms of Cannabinoid Hyperemesis Syndrome include persistent nausea, often in the morning, repeated vomiting and retching, making the sound and movement of vomiting, and this can happen up to 5 times an hour, intense abdominal discomfort or pain, fear of throwing up, and loss of appetite. Hot baths and showers tend to help reduce or curb the symptoms. Many people with CHS will compulsively shower or bathe, often for hours every day, to relieve CHS symptoms. The symptoms of CHS and their severity depend on the phase of the syndrome. The prodromal phase, this phase is most common in adults who have used cannabis since they were teenagers. You may have abdominal pain or morning nausea. You may also fear throwing up but never actually vomit, and this phase can last for months or years. Hyperemetic phase. This is the characteristic phase of CHS. It usually lasts 24 to 48 hours and involves overwhelming recurring vomiting and nausea. You may start compulsively bathing and avoid certain foods or purposely restrict your food intake. And recovery phase. During recovery, you stop using cannabis even in small amounts. When you're in the recovery phase, symptoms lessen over a few days or months. Eventually, they completely disappear. What is scromiting? Some people call certain symptoms of CHS scromiting. The term combines vomiting and screaming. You may have intense pain which causes you to scream while you vomit. Scientists don't yet know the exact cause of CHS, but the main theory is that it may happen due to long-term overstimulation of receptors in your endocannabinoid system, your ECS. This may lead to issues with your body's natural control of nausea and vomiting. People who use marijuana long-term, typically for about 10 to 12 years, are at risk of developing CHS. But not every person who uses marijuana, even long-term use, develops CHS. It tends to affect people who use cannabis at least once a week and happens more often in adults who've been using cannabis since their adolescent years. There's lots more information in the article that I have left a link to. I think that's enough to cover what we're talking about here. It's a horrible syndrome. I feel for anybody who may have it. Now, the positive news, if there is any positive news in here, is pretty well if you stop using the cannabis, the symptoms stop. And that's what Tony has advised me, that his partner stopped using cannabis and it went away. The nausea went away. Wow. So thanks for making me aware of it again, Tony. I was aware of it before. I think it's something we probably need to remind ourselves every once in a while about. There's no connection to who is getting it and how you're getting it. Luckily for me, I have been a long-term cannabis smoker for a number of years, and I have had none of those effects. None, absolutely none. And knock on wood, I hope it stays that way.
From the cannabis-infused studio in the clouds, this is the Cannabis Podcast.
I have to admit, this next story gives me a bit of concern. This is from theounce.ca and written by David Wiley. Cannabis has not generally been linked as a cause of cancer. However, a new study has found some evidence that chronic use of cannabis can be associated with increased risk of head and neck cancer. U.S. researchers from the University of Southern California, University of California, and Stanford University conducted a cohort study that included more than 4 million people, including more than 115,000 with cannabis use disorder. They found those with cannabis use disorder may be at an increased risk of any head and neck cancer, as well as oropharyngeal, nasopharyngeal, salivary gland, and laryngeal cancer, compared with a group of matched individuals. Cannabis is the most commonly used illicit substance worldwide. Whether cannabis use is associated with head and neck cancer is unclear, says the summary. Further studies are required to further explore the strength and potential mechanisms of their association. The large multi-center cohort study used clinical records from a database that included 20 years of data from 64 healthcare organizations. The database was searched for medical records for U.S. adults with and without cannabis-related disorder who had recorded outpatient hospital clinic visits and no prior history of HNC. Researchers matched for demographic characteristics, alcohol-related disorders, and tobacco use. Relative risks were then calculated to explore risk of HNC, including HNC subsites. The analysis was repeated among those younger than 60 years and 60 years or older. Researchers found that 116,000 people who regularly used cannabis had a higher HNC diagnosis rate than those who did not. That group consisted of 44.5% of women and had a mean age of 46.4. For comparison, the non-cannabis cohort included 3.9 million individuals, with 54.5% women and a mean age of 60.8. The rate of new HNC diagnosis in all sites was higher in the cannabis-related disorder cohort, says the study, including oral, oropharyngeal, and laryngeal cancer. Even though I'm worried about it, the benefit of consuming cannabis daily and what it does for me so far is far outweighing any concerns that I have that may occur in the future. So whatever you were dealing with, I hope you're dealing with it well, and I hope it's going well. Let's not worry too much about this one. We'll keep our eye on this to see if there's any more information about this in the future. Well, after a rather weird season of home growing, it was my Acapulco Golds that really set it off to being a strange year. I've already mentioned that these were some seeds that were freebies. So they came out of last year's crop, which was an auto flower Acapulco Gold that shouldn't have produced seeds, but I ended up with 3 of them and they all popped. One of them became a male. We pulled that out. The other 2 females, but boy, they were weird. They were really lanky, really tall, and really tiny buds. I could not get really huge buds no matter how long I waited. And I waited until I finally pulled out my microscope and took a look at the trichomes, and they were fully saturated, fully complete. In fact, there was a lot of amber going on. So there was no sense leaving them on the plant anymore. So I pulled it, brought all the branches down, did a little wet trim. I'm not sure why I did. It was such a lot of work because the buds were so small, so larvae. But nonetheless, brought them down, put them into my drying area, which I've used this year very effectively. And they dried in probably 4 or 5 days, maybe 6. But as I'm starting to harvest and work with some of these, I'm realizing I don't want to stick these in a jar and watch them nug up because they're so freaking tiny. So I decided at the last minute to do a change in plans. I took everything that I had from my Acapulco Gold that was not yet in a jar, and I did do 4 small jars, where I have some bud curing. But I took everything that was left, and it probably added up to about an ounce, maybe 2 ounces of actual end result in weed. Put all of that harvest, went on the web, took a look at some YouTube videos from Frenchy Cannoli, the godfather of hash, and the godfather of ice water extraction. Got some great ideas from watching some of Frenchy's videos. Did the ice water extraction. Now, what I hadn't done before was do it repeatedly. So previously when I had tried to make some bubble hash, I had just done 1 run. Okay, that's it, and threw it all away. This time, with what I got after doing that first run through, I got quite a bit out of it, more than I ever had before. Now, one of the reasons for that, I think, I did more agitation. I spent more time getting all those bubbles bouncing down in my little bucket of ice water filled with weed. And by the time I was done, it was just a bubbling. And as I started to pull those bags out, every bag I got to had more and more trichomes, all settled down at the bottom of those. I use bubble bags, which I guess I haven't mentioned yet. 4 levels of bubble bags. So I finished the first, put everything onto my nice little drying screen, and it was more than I had ever achieved in any of my attempts at bubble hash before. That was the first run. Put everything back, added the water, added more ice, did some more stirring, and did a second run. And I probably got twice as much off of my second run as I did my first. Now, should I have done a third run? Maybe. But in reality, I didn't feel the heart and the effort to go through that third run and think that it was going to give me all that much difference. So I stopped there, let everything dry off, actually put it on my little screen. So it's a little, I think it's a 20 micron screen. It's very small. And put all of the collected trichomes that I had collected from my ice water extraction. And then followed some other advice that I found on YouTube and put it in the freezer. because after sitting in the freezer for a few minutes, it was nice and hard, and I could then bring it out and use a little scraper or a grater and grate that down. So now I've just got all of these little pieces of bubble hash. Put it on a parchment paper, and a fair chunk of hash, a fair chunk of little hash that I had. So then it was time to just let it air dry. I put it off in a secluded area, which was nice and dark and rather cool. And after a day, all of the drying was done. Those little bits of hashish, which were a bright brown, were now a dark brown and dry and did not need any further work. So back to YouTube. How do I cure and finalize my bubble hash and put it into something that I can utilize? Well, that's when I discovered the methodology of getting a wine bottle and filling it with some fairly hot water, so boiling water into the wine bottle. You need to use some oven mitts to work from this point on. And then I took that wine bottle over top of the parchment paper that contained all of my dried bubble hash, and I started pressing it, rolling it back and forth, slowly. Pressure, rolling, pressure, rolling. And as I did that, all of those little components of bubble hash that were on the parchment paper started to congeal and form this little mass, this little, I don't even know what to call it, this square of hashish. And as I continued to do that, almost like I was doing making some puff pastry, because I was laminating it, folding it over, and rolling it out again, folding it over and rolling it out again. So I would have had like 15 layers if I put it in the thing and cooked it as a biscuit. But what I ended up with was an absolutely beautiful creation that I have never created before. Continuing to use that wine bottle and pressing it in and pressing it out made me end up with this little slot. It was about maybe 5 inches square, folded over onto itself. And I end up with what I'm holding in my hand, a 5-gram temple ball. And I'm just going to validate that weight one more time, because I couldn't believe that it was that heavy. And there it is. It's actually gained a little weight. It's now 5.03 in the curing process. And it's just a thing of beauty. I don't know if you've ever bought any temple balls, but when they come out, just this little round piece of hashish, nice and shiny. Oh, and it is starting to develop some lovely hashish aromas. So this is Acapulco Gold Temple Ball, made from the larvae buds from Acapulco Gold. I got just over 5 grams of it, and it was an experience that I look forward to doing again. I don't know why I haven't done it before, but if you ever get the chance and you can get some bubble hash and you want to take it a little further to make your old temple ball, it's a lot of fun, and I'm thinking it's probably worth it.
THC, CBD, terpene profiles, what's in me? Oh, please explain to me. Cultivar Corner, Cultivar Corner, oh yeah. Cultivar Corner, please explain this stuff to me.
And we're going far afield today for Cultivar Corner. I've been listening to Matt and Sarah at Up in Smoke out of Vancouver, and talking about some of the great weed they have been getting through direct delivery, and specifically, and more specifically, from Salt Spring Island and the Magi. Weed grown on Salt Spring Island by the Magi. Well, we picked some up. We picked up some Timmy's OG Shark. I got 7 grams of it in indica dominant, and let me get you a little bit of a background on Magi Cannabis. Grown on Salt Spring by the Magi. Magi Cannabis is a small-scale, family-owned and operated farm located on Salt Spring Island, BC. As second-generation craft growers, they have deep love for the cannabis plants they cultivate, and that love is evident in the exceptional products they work hard to create. Josh and Nadine have been dedicated to growing fine cannabis since the 90s. As longtime islanders, they employ a small team of family and friends and are committed to paying living wages and providing long-term jobs for local residents. They have years of experience in medical cannabis production and have recently completed building a Health Canada-approved custom design facility for our micro-cultivation license. At Magi Cannabis, we celebrate the magic of this powerful plant medicine, which can help transform consciousness and support physical and mental health. We have deep respect for the land we live on and the water and energy we use, and are grateful to be able to offer the gift of flowers to discerning consumers. We're a small crew of growers and trimmers, many of us second-generation cannabis producers. The aim is premium flower with a delightful smoking experience, always looking for a flower that can perfectly characterize the great qualities of its particular variety in aroma, taste, and effect, as well as consistently smooth burn. Small batch artisanal cannabis, grown in virgin coir for a consistent burn, 2-week whole plant cold cure for a smooth smoke, hand-trimmed dry to preserve terps and trichomes, tested and pure, non-irradiated. And what are we doing today? We are doing Timmy's OG Shark. So let's open up the jar. Again, I took my 7 grams and I stuck it into a jar. And, oh my goodness sakes, as soon as you open this jar, wow, the aromas are so prevalent. The mystical coastal elder, Timmy's OG Shark. And I pull one of those buds out. And I'll also have to say, this is exceptionally well crafted and cured. Like really, really nice. Just a gorgeous looking bud. Really nice and firm. Lots of beauty on it. Let's take a peek at the trichomes. Oh my goodness sakes. And the trichomes are just bursting all over it. It's a dark green bud with a lot of red pistils. Yeah, oh my, and tricone abundant. I just love cannabis. I just do. I always have, and I guess I probably always will. So, what are the details on Timmy's OG Shark? It is an indica-dominant hybrid. Here's Gary again, first thing in the morning, doing his Cultivar Corner with an indica. Potency, strong, 22 to 27%. My actual THC is even higher than that, at 28.7%. And total terpenes sitting at 3.39, and my main terpenes, myrcene, nerolidol, and limonene. Timmy's OG Shark, the elder statement of the cannabis kingdom, is so old, it remembers a time when tie-dye was fashionable and flip phones were cutting-edge tech. With a lineage more mysterious than a hidden treasure map, this strange skunk, musk, and cigar leaf aroma will have you feeling like you stumbled into the smokiest speakeasy in the woods. Let's pause for a moment. Okay, so the skunk, there is a bit of skunk in there, which is really unique. The musk, definitely musky. And the cigar leaf aroma, I guess I can find a little bit of that. Its potency, strong enough to make even Bigfoot take a step back and say, whoa, that's strong. Myrcene, nerolidol, and limonene, the terpene trio, are like the wise old sages of the coastal forest, guiding you through a journey of cosmic insight that's as deep as the ocean and as hazy as a foggy morning in Twin Peaks. I love your description. Whoever's working on your website is doing a fine job. As good a job as apparently you're doing with your cannabis. My goodness, these buds are just absolutely beautiful. Well, that's enough staring at the beauty. Oh, and they are so tight. I pull that out. This little bud, again, really, really impressed with the trimming. The trimming and the curing. Really a nice hard bud. Have I got some stick to it? Oh, yes, I do. Stick to my finger and pull that up a foot off my table before she pulls off. Pulls off? That's a new word we invented just for today, because no, we didn't. We did not invent a new word. It is not true. So, looking forward to this. Picked it up from the folks at Up in Smoke down in Vancouver, who got it through a direct delivery. And let me tell you about when this was processed as well. This was packaged on July 15th, 2024. I'm loving it. I always like it when my weed is fresh. Okay, I think I've got enough to get down to the goodies. I should probably turn on my Air Max, so she'll get up the temperature for me fairly quickly. The aromas that come out when I break this up, even more so. A lot more of that, that skunkiness. I'm really lunkin', skunkin'. This is just early morning. That's not because I'm stoned I'm speaking like that. It's early morning and I haven't quite woken up yet. I have my joint rolled. I have my vaporizer all ready to rock. And that looks like, in fact, it's up to temperature. So why don't we try the vaporizer first? This is Timmy's OG Shark, the elder statement of the Cannabis Kingdom, grown on Salt Spring Island by the Magi. Oh, and in the vaporizer, the skunky tones, the musky tones, definitely coming through clearly. The cigar leaf aroma, I'm not really fond of that one. I don't really like cigars. Oh, but abundance in flavor when you put it through the vaporizer. There's just something magical about the vaporizer and cannabis. So I've been hearing lots of good things about the Magi, grown on Salt Spring Island by the Magi, and I have to say I'm pretty impressed with what I'm seeing. Really a nice-looking weed. These buds are just so well manufactured and so well cured and trimmed. Just things of beauty, really. Okay. Oh, and there you go. A couple of hits off of the vaporizer, and suddenly my endocannabinoid system is coming alive. I think I better fire up the joint before I get too far here. So Timmy's OG Shark. Oh my, that's a real different taste in the joint. Wow. I guess maybe it's more of that cigar leaf aroma and more of the musk that's coming out when I light the joint. Definitely getting the skunk out of the vaporizer, the musk out of the joint. And in all cases, the THC heading quickly into my endocannabinoid system. Another great start to the day with a Cultivar Corner. I've been looking to do something from the folks at Magi Cannabis for a while and decided to, and I have another one in the works. I'll tease you. I will be doing another Cultivar Corner with some Salt Spring Magi, and that's going to be their pine tar. That'll be coming up in a future version. And I guess to be fully transparent, this is not the first time we've done Salt Spring by the Magi. We did Love Haze by Salt Spring by the Magi back in episode 149. For some reason, I guess I was just too stoned that I forgot all about it. But then I remembered. But right now, let's concentrate on the Timmy's OG Shark. Oh, yeah. That is a really nice taste. Ho, 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 ho. Nothing like smoking some great cannabis. And as I was getting ready for prep today, I came across a thread on X where one guy was complaining about the fact that he doesn't like joints because he can't roll joints. And I think that's the key factor. If you learn to roll joints, they're pretty easy to do. And I have to say they are probably my preferred way of consuming cannabis. In addition to the vaporizer, of course. If I'm going for flavor, it's the vaporizer. If I'm going for convenience and just it's really easy because I can roll a pretty good joint pretty fast, I go for a joint. It is a matter of personal taste. And speaking of personal taste, how is my endocannabinoid system rocking with Timmy's OG Shark from the Magi, grown on Salt Spring Island by the Magi? 7 grams is what I got. As I say, my THC at 28.7, my total terps at 3.39. Oh, and this is nice. This is rocking my head right now. Yeah, the euphoria is coming in and bursting. And this is moving right into some nice body relaxation, too. Oh, that feels good on my aching bones. There's a reason why we consume cannabis. Our endocannabinoid system mixes so well with the cannabinoids inside this wonderful plant. And this is definitely an indica. I got some euphoria going on. I don't have any happy eyes, but clear in my head at the moment, moving into a deep, deep body stone. Oh, my. I am loving this. This is chilling me out. I may go back for a little nap. No, I probably won't do that. but really enjoying the smoke. So picking up a bit of skunk when I do it in the vaporizer, definitely some musk there too. And when I move to the joint, it's definitely more musky. And one more fire up on the joint, and I think I am probably done. Oh yeah, this is really nice. This is one of the nicer indicas that I have smoked of lately, just because of the general overall feeling it's given me. I got some euphoria going on. I got some happiness happening. I got some body relaxation. I got a nice little stone going on. And I just kind of feel like chilling. So you know what? I think I'm going to chill. Timmy's OG Shark, grown on Salt Spring Island by the Magi. I'm in love with the Magi. Do a little check-in a few minutes later and see how my endocannabinoid system is rolling along. It is rolling really nicely. This is a really nice indica. I am feeling, and what do they call it? The elder statesman of the cannabis kingdom. And I can understand that now. Wow. Just really nice, really deep, and very enjoyable. Thank you, Magi.
Sharing stories about good weed while trying good weed. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
And this next story from Stratcan.com, written by David Brown, and a different approach. A cannabis producer behind one of a handful of farm gate stores in New Brunswick is closing its doors as it looks to reset its cannabis business from the ground up. Crystal Cure Incorporated, a micro-cannabis producer in Shediac, Cape, New Brunswick, says it will cease its cannabis operations at the end of September, primarily due to delays in securing the financing needed for its plant expansion. The company's CEO, Jonathan Wilson, says this is likely not the end of the road for the company, but a chance for them to reset their business, building out a new facility that better matches their needs and the realities of market demands. Eventually, we knew that we were going to have to make a decision, Wilson tells Stratcan. The company's been operating for several years inside a much larger facility that has remained underutilized. In late 2023, Crystal Cure made the decision to downgrade their license from a standard to a micro, reflecting that it was already operating with a very small footprint. The building the company's been operating in is a 63,000 square foot, built at a time when the company was looking at bold early market projections. However, due to this and problems with how the facility was constructed, Crystal Cure wasn't able to fully utilize the space. And since 2019, the company has also been involved in legal proceedings concerning the construction of its original facility. We're still operating out of a tiny temporary space that was only supposed to be in place for a year, notes Wilson. However, the construction of our original facility was halted prematurely when the structure was rendered unusable, which now has to be dealt with in a court of law. This has added a lot of cost to a small operation and also takes away our focus, time, and energy from what matters. Wilson adds, when you combine the added pressure with the current financial ecosystem of the legal cannabis industry, it doesn't give us enough to be able to survive, let alone generate enough profit from our operations to expand to meet demand. This is one example of the impacts of the short-sighted decisions made by policymakers across the country, impacts that they've flat-out ignored at both the federal and provincial levels. Although the owners had hoped to maintain their current license while they bring in new investors to build out a new purpose-built facility, Wilson says they had to finally make the tough decision to revoke their license and shut down operations while they work towards that ultimate goal. We love the legal cannabis industry, and we believe we will play a part in its future here in Canada. However, as ironic as it is, we had to take a step back from it and focus elsewhere in order for us to survive long enough to secure the funding for our expansion. We have found a potential partner that believes in us and understands our vision. We will do whatever is necessary to hang on, even if it means ceasing our current operation and starting again. We are in this for the long term. One thing that had kept the company going over the past year, giving them hope they could hold off this new decision to shut down entirely, was the success of their cannabis farmgate store, Le Bac Door, one of just 6 in New Brunswick and only a few more in all of Canada. That's the part I'm the saddest about, Wilson tells Stratcan. The supporters of Farmgate are the ones who have given us an extra couple of months. This summer has been incredible with new customers and tourists, and the feedback we get has helped let us know we're doing something right. It helped us go a little longer. The part I'm going to miss the most is seeing customers every day. In the meantime, Crystal Cure will continue to have a foothold in the cannabis industry through its sister company, Gourmet Chef Packers, which sells living soil, worm castings, and other agricultural inputs under the brand Adonis Growing Solutions. According to Wilson, consumers of Crystal Cure products will have a few more weeks of availability before their limited releases are no longer available. And that's an interesting approach of a company realizing that they needed to reset, and so they're doing that. And we wish them success in the future. And as always, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate the fact that you're a listener to the Cannabis Podcast. If you ever have a comment about anything you hear, send a note to info@cannabispodcast.com. I love getting those. And I also love leaving you with a bit of a chuckle. So we're going away from the quotes for a little bit and going back to some humor. I felt we needed a bit more chuckle rather than some intense thought. What do you get when you mix marijuana and electricity? A joint venture. Why did the stoner study in the garden? Because he wanted to grow his knowledge of marijuana. Why was the marijuana plant always late? Because it took too long to roll out of bed. How do you know if someone is a true stoner? They can roll a joint with their eyes closed. It's a real high skill. And I'm going to stop on that one because I like to think that I could do that. Who knows? Well, I hope you enjoyed the experience. And from the guy in the clouds, that wraps it up for episode 174 of the Cannabis Podcast.
From the cannabis-infused studio, high above the Okanagan Valley, this was the Cannabis Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To check out more great cannabis podcasts, go to podconnects.com. Here's a preview of one of our other shows.
Hi, my name's Kate, and I'm your host of the Pop Moms Podcast. I started the Pop Moms Podcast, well, because I wanted to end the stigma against using cannabis, specifically with moms, but also anyone who chooses to consume. I strive for a balance of humor and education, along with some pretty rad guests, to help combat social biases that come with consuming cannabis. Kids are hard. Join me for regular podcast episodes packed with parenting hacks, real-life stories, and of course, my favorite cannabis products. The days are long, but the years are short. So roll another J and take a deep breath. Keep blazing and stay amazing.